On the outskirts of Milwaukee's west side resides a small neighborhood named Blue Mound Heights. It's similar to most other neighborhoods in the area, with tree-lined streets, houses, a school, and even a firehouse. But on one unassuming corner stands a lone brick column affixed with a copper plaque. While the location of this column may be odd as is, the story it tells of the very land it sits on is anything but ordinary.
Just 28 years ago today, the little lot of land behind me was once home to the Fairview Mausoleum, a building that looks so stereotypically haunted that you almost wouldn't believe it sat right here in the middle of a west side suburban neighborhood. I'm Magnus Bond, and join me today as we do a little deep dive into the history of the Fairview Mausoleum.
It was the early 1910s in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The city was flourishing, and consequently so were the graveyards. The aptly named Wisconsin Mausoleum Construction Company heard demand for mausoleums and other modern burial fashions were on the rise. So on the corner of 63rd and Fairview, at the time known as 54th and Johnson, came about the neoclassical Fairview Mausoleum.
Built in 1912, it was one of the first large mausoleums in the Milwaukee area. No expense was spared in the sturdiness and detail in its construction, as is so eloquently described on the back of this 1918 postcard.
The exterior is of Wisconsin mahogany granite and the interior is of the finest marble. The entire building is absolutely fireproof, not a single piece of wood entering into the construction. All windows, door frames, and doors are of bronze, and the roof is covered in foreign tile.
And the luxuries weren't just limited to the inside. The interior of this mausoleum was fitted out with state-of-the-art technology for the time, boasting electric lights, heat, bathrooms, and even ventilation systems. It also featured a chapel for visitors. Simply said, the fixtures featured inside of this home for the dead were vastly more luxurious than most houses for the living. Among the earliest recorded burials here includes Captain Edward G. Crosby, who was a victim of the infamous sinking of the RMS Titanic in 1912. His wife and daughter, who survived the disaster, were later interred alongside him. As the 1920s came roaring in, so did massive housing booms. Suddenly, the once fairly isolated mausoleum was surrounded by new houses on all sides.
Most of these houses were used as residences for the workers of the nearby Alice Chalmers factory, one of the biggest employers in the area. It got a little snowy while I was walking over here. Oh yeah. In 1932, the Art Deco Juneau High School was built, dwarfing pretty much every building in the area. Also by this point, the Fairview Mausoleum was pretty much becoming old news, and interments were becoming rarer and rarer.
Like most places during the Great Depression, the Fairview Mausoleum struggled, but not just financially. You see, the crypt was no longer one of the few community mausoleums in Milwaukee. Most cemeteries by this point were constructing their own community mausoleums, many of which were much nicer than the aging Fairview Mausoleum, which had become nothing more than a black sheep in its own neighborhood. By 1952, not even half a century after being constructed, the owners filed for bankruptcy. As an attempt to keep the old crypt in respectable shape, the Fairview Mausoleum Maintenance Company was formed. They could only really do so much, though, as they had only a $100,000 budget to work with. Over the next 40 years, the mausoleum, while not completely abandoned, slowly but surely began to show wear and tear. The trees around the edges of the property, for example, grew much more unkempt over time. By 1984, the front of the property became so overgrown that the front doors were sealed off permanently, leaving only the less sightly back entrance usable. To add insult to injury, drop ceilings were installed throughout the building, hiding away the ornate arched ceilings and taking away what little beauty the building still had left to offer. Overgrown foliage wasn't the only problem, as vandals frequently broke in and trashed the place, leaving graffiti and trash in virtually every corner of the building. Eventually, the very same maintenance company formed to save the mausoleum wasn't just running out of money, but members as well. Deciding to throw in the towel, they filed a lawsuit, intending to force the city to take over the responsibility of maintaining the now severely derelict structure. The company claimed it didn't have the money to keep up with the repairs anymore, and the city relented. The old Fairview Mausoleum was officially more of an albatross than an asset, loved by few, if any at all.
It took only 2 years before the city finally condemned the property. And when an inspection was performed and the old rusted doors were finally opened for the first time in years, The inspectors were astounded at what they saw.
Water leaked from ceilings, vaults were broken open, and virtually every surface was covered in mold and grime. So much mold and grime, in fact, that entire gallons of bleach had to be poured out onto the floor to make the conditions better for surveying. If the natural decay wasn't bad enough, the man-made issues certainly made up for it. Urns laid shattered and scattered across the ground, and trash found itself in virtually every corner, from tires to lawnmowers. Unfortunately, it was obvious. The old Fairview Mausoleum had to go, and fast. Throughout the course of December of 1996 into May of 1997, roughly 1,000 caskets and urns were identified, labeled, and prepped to either be claimed by surviving families or to be rehomed in a new location. The chosen location for the unclaimed dead was 7.5 miles north in Graceland Cemetery, which had reserved an entire section of its land for its new inhabitants. If you visit Graceland Cemetery today, be sure to drop by Section 11. There you won't just find the former residents of the mausoleum, but also 2 pillars guarding the entranceway. These 2 pillars are actually parapets from the roof, and they are all that physically remain of the old Fairview Mausoleum. And by late 1997, the 85-year-old Fairview Mausoleum finally met its end. The building was quickly demolished, leaving roughly 2 acres of vacant land behind. This didn't last long, though, as only 2 years later, in 1999, a fire station, number 35 to be exact, was constructed on the west side of the lot.
And yes, it's supposedly haunted. In fact, you'll find more stories about the hauntings of this firehouse than of the mausoleum itself.
Firefighters of Station 35 have reported pots and pans flying off stoves, apparitions dressed in long-since dated clothing, and even faucets running by themselves, spraying cold water on full blast. Some attribute this to being the spirit of Edward Crosby, the aforementioned victim of the Titanic disaster. Interestingly, the staff of Station 35 embraced the hauntings, even going as far as to nickname their station the Crypt Keeper.
The area outside of the firehouse is arguably less haunted, with the land now serving as a small park for the surrounding community. It features a community garden as well as ample green space where the neighbors frequently gather for cookouts and kickbacks.
At the end of the day, the old Fairview Mausoleum was simply a victim to time. Like many other buildings of the 20th century, its prime was short-lived, falling behind the rapid progress of technology and human taste. I also imagine being smack dab in the middle of a neighborhood, and behind a high school at that, certainly didn't help.
So next time you're walking around in your own neighborhood, keep an eye out for the subtle details. You might not ever know which stories lie behind the mundane. With that being said, my name's Magnus Bond, and I'll see you next time.